You're listening to Undeclared, the podcast that provides strategies to overcome the challenges that higher education institutions face. We help colleges and universities attract the right students because we know an educated planet is a better place for everyone. Please welcome your host, Allison Lanier.
Hi, I'm Allison, and you're listening to Undeclared, a podcast for higher education problem solvers where we discuss all things higher ed with university and college professionals, as well as industry experts. We all know the importance of stakeholder buy-in and how involving your key stakeholders early in the process for any project you're undergoing is really the right choice. We have also dove into what it takes to put together a great campaign. But I'm really excited for today's conversation because our guest is going to shed light on the communication strategies that go into great campaigns and how you can really gain more engagement from a very important key stakeholder group. And that's our alumni. I don't think we talk enough about them. And so I'm just super excited to introduce you to today's guest, David Gibson. David is Vice President for Communications and Marketing at Middlebury, where he oversees public affairs, marketing, internal and crisis communications, branding, web strategy, social media, creative services, and print and mail operations. So basically everything. He has 3 decades of experience advancing the interests of mission-driven institutions and has built programs clarifying their value in the world and bringing deeper engagement with stakeholders. He's held staff positions at Hampshire and MIT and was a vice president of strategic communications for the international consulting firm Grinsbach Gleer and Associates. At Cornell, he and his team won 2 Sibley Magazine of the Year awards. And as its managing editor, he helped Yankee earn its first National Magazine Award nomination for reporting. David, thank you so much for joining me today. I know that is a lot, and I feel like you have so much background to offer our listeners today. And so I just want to turn it over to you to see if there's anything else that you would like to add and shed some more light on.
Thank you, Allison. It's good to be with you, and I appreciate the introduction. I think I would just maybe just draw a line through a few of those positions you mentioned. I came into higher ed communications and marketing as an editor and publisher of alumni magazines and did that at 2 institutions. That led me to positions as a communications director for major campaigns, fundraising campaigns, both embedded in institutions and as a consultant. And that in turn led to the broader portfolio I have now, which is all of the soup to nuts things that you had mentioned. And I just want to say, I've learned a ton from not just my colleagues in marketing and communications, but the colleagues who run the programs, that we were doing marketing and communications work for, are the real experts here and sort of run the business. And so learning from them has influenced my communications, and it's also given me a sense of how all of these marketing and communications issues connect. Crisis or media, and the institution's name out in the world or in the local press obviously affects every other communication or marketing piece we'd be sending to any constituent or stakeholder at any time. So it's good to see sort of the network of communications and marketing.
Yeah. And I always think it's so interesting to your point of, how you kind of come into your role and then how that evolves just throughout the years. And you kind of get to a certain point and you're like, well, I look at this very different than someone who maybe just came in immediately into this role. So it's really cool to get that perspective. But where I always like to start people is what brought you into higher ed? Like, where did that all start for you?
So for me, I was out of work. I was working for a small magazine. This is many years ago now, a couple decades ago. And a magazine editor position opened up. This was at Northeastern University in Boston at a really interesting point in Northeastern's life. So I was there I think I was lucky to be there at a real pivotal time when the institution was beginning to change into what it has become these days. And so it was looking for magazine work. I love magazines. I love the way big type and big images, come together. I like how much room one has to tell a story, whether it's 50 words in a caption or 10 words in a caption or 6,000 words. So this job at Northeastern just opened my eyes to just how rich, obviously, the content was around colleges and universities, whatever the institution. And I would say, too, that it really opened my eyes to how a publication, how a periodical, how words and images can motivate a constituency and almost bring them in ways closer to the institution, or to introduce them to the institution in ways they might not have earlier, because the magazine offers a way to not just tell stories about the people and the place and the issues of the institution, but to capture the soul of the place. Mm-hmm. And when I find that in any work, whether it's magazines or campaign communications or any media work, that reaching heart and head, or usually it's reaching heart, which leads to reaching the head and the mind, that's really powerful stuff. And I loved the way my work in words and images could help bring support to meaningful organizations.
Yeah, I think that that's great. And a point that you're bringing to the forefront of my mind is that I think, especially when we're talking about branding in an institution, a lot of times people get hung up on the visual aesthetics of the brand, and they really miss what you just said. It's the messaging and the soul, and how do you articulate who you are? And that's really what gets that head and heart relationship going. It's the words, right? It's how you speak about yourself. So I guess with your background, how have you been able to bring that know-how into your current role with Middlebury?
For me, it's in whatever work we're doing, whatever stakeholder or audience that we're trying to reach, it's and you know this, and your listeners, our listeners know this. It's all about being authentic, being genuine. I would say being colloquial, and there's a tendency in higher education, I think, to be a bit high-minded. Institutions of higher learning have high purposes, and I found that one of the most compelling ways to communicate a truly high purpose is by being conversational and colloquial. So I would say, coming from magazines where the work itself is just so rooted in people and the issues and showing that in the most human way, that has permeated everything that I've done, whether it's in a press release or an internal communications, a letter to an internal community. It's really just using the words of the institution and the words of the people of the institution, which includes obviously alumni who are out in the world. And that, I think, was the biggest lesson for me out of magazines that I've applied in literally every job I've had in higher ed, is how do we find the words and phrases and get into the minds of those we're trying to reach, and then take those words and phrases and sort of that vibe, if you will, and project it outward. And that way we're not so much creating words here and creating content. It's more like we're curating or we're collating the way people talk out there and express the institution. And I found that to be a way, probably the strongest way, that audiences as stakeholders can see themselves in the institution.
Yes, I love it. I mean, you just said the word human. And I think that's the piece that we forget the most, is that we get lost in trying to become something that someone thinks that we're supposed to be, right? I think that's the biggest mistake that anyone can make, not even just institutions, but as human beings ourselves, and how we present ourselves to others, right? But it's just about being who you are. And then I think that leads, especially to institutions, for example, of you're going to find more of the right fit students who it truly resonates with. And then they go on to be your largest advocates as alumni, is like, hey, from what you see from the first interaction, whether that be a news article or a display ad or your website, what is presented there truly translates into the on-campus experience. the after campus experience and so on and so forth. And so it really starts with exactly what you just said, is like really formulating that message in such a way that it just resonates with your audience because it is so true to them.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And, I'm thinking about the ways that I've been able to approach that work in order to sort of get those words and phrases that resonate. And thinking back to my time at Hampshire, when I first got to Hampshire, I met with, it was probably 40 people, faculty, students, staff, and alums within the first couple of months. I was just on the sort of hello, my name is tour, introducing myself, but mostly listening and just, tell me about Hampshire or any institution from your perspective. And it's in those 40 plus 1 hour conversations where I just came back with a sense of the institution told in ways through stories and specific phrases that I could never come up with on my own. And it was all of that listening and sort of starting a conversation with, talk at me, what is, and then leading to just an open-ended conversation about the place and its issues, its hurdles, right? Its challenges, as well as what it, sort of the stuff it has going for it that's easier. And then coming back with all of this material to then figure out how to project that out in literally everything we did, whether it was an admissions piece, whether it was remarks from the president or the chair of the board, or a stewardship piece for the campaign. Literally everything was sort of projecting out those words, that collection of words that I had gotten from all of those interviews.
Yeah. And I'm going to go ahead and point out right here that this is a good takeaway. And so when we talk about stakeholder buy-in, we think that it has to be this like whole performance or just like a big overhaul of like, oh, we got to do focus groups. We got to do this. Y'all, stakeholder buy-in is as simple as what David just mentioned, is that just go and have an hour-long conversation with people. That's buy-in, because you're getting their opinion and you're hearing them and you're listening to them and you're like truly taking what their thoughts and what they say. And then if you put all of that together and then you start developing your campaigns and your messaging and they see that, they're going to be like, wow, they really listen. This is true. This is what I said. I had a piece of that. That's buy-in. It's really just listening to somebody.
I think it is. And I think about the work that I and the teams that I've led do, where, we'll have hundreds of projects over the course of a year. We've got a pretty sizable staff. And so whoever we're meeting with, who has to reach some audience, for some purpose, to achieve some goal. And, starting out those conversations simply by saying, talk at me, please, tell me, what are you trying to do? What are the hurdles in this work? What keeps you awake at night? How would you measure success or define success? Starting off there. I mean, I could spend, half an hour in that kind of discovery work, when oftentimes, and these are colleagues, let's say on campus, whether they're our admissions colleagues or student life or on the faculty, who have something to communicate, some communications or marketing piece that they need through our partnership with them. And, they're often surprised that we're not coming in with a sort of a template. This is how we do stuff here. And I think it's really powerful when they realize they've had the floor for a half an hour. And the only time I speak is to then ask, 3 follow-up questions so they could talk some more. And I think it builds trust. I mean, I've seen it build trust. That I think it sends the message, very true message, that this group, this communications and marketing group, understands who we are, wants to understand. And I always, no matter how good the discussion and how deep the discussion, always end with okay, what are the next steps? I think it builds trust and confidence when they've had a terrific conversation with somebody on my team or myself. And at the end, they know that we understand deadlines and nuts and bolts, and that process is as important as the final product. And all of that, right off the bat, can just make for really good relationships, really productive relationships that could last years.
Yes. And I love the point that you just made too about kind of guiding those next steps. I think, and I've experienced this firsthand doing some focus groups, is I have heard from people saying like, well, is this coming to fruition? Like, are we doing anything with this? Or are you just going to hear our opinion and nothing happens? And I think that's the worst thing. And so like what you just mentioned is that building trust, you're setting the next steps, you're understanding deadlines, you're hearing their opinion, but you're also there to make things happen. And so establishing that relationship is really key. So I appreciate that point.
Thank you. Yeah. And then what's also often a surprise is when let's say we put out the piece, whatever it turns out to be, and then we reach, our colleagues, first and say, now, can we look at how this, track how this actually landed? Did it land? Mm-hmm. And maybe it's focus groups or a quick follow-up survey. If it's social media or anything digital, obviously we've got all of that input. But the idea that the work doesn't end when we've produced the piece, that we're checking in to see how did it land, and what have we learned? What can we do going forward? And that's often something that takes it's a dynamic, I think, that takes what might have been seen as a transaction. Yeah. We need this communications and marketing piece into we're in there with you as full marketing and communications partners.
Yeah, I like it. So I'm going to transition us a little bit into digging a little bit deeper into your expertise on engagement. Now, if you were to look up the definition of engagement, you really get a definition within a definition, other than getting engaged the marital way, right? But it's like you see the act of engaging or something that engages. So how do you describe engagement? Like, what does that mean to you?
To me, it's, I think at its core, is, and this is how I see all of the work that we do, it's about reaching an audience or a stakeholder, let's say, maybe somebody who isn't connected with us that we want connected, or somebody who is connected who we want a deeper connection. And it's getting them to feel something through whatever we've sent them, however we've connected with them. Have them feel something about the institution that motivates them to do something with the institution, whether it's a volunteerism. We're mission-driven institutions, and volunteerism is something that is crucial for our health. Maybe would they give philanthropically, whether it's $50 a year or $50 million, depending on the donor. Would they give us moral support? If they saw us in the news in a certain way, would they speak well of us? So for me, engagement is about, at its core, making audiences or stakeholders feel something in order to motivate them to do something in partnership with us. And so much of that has to do with connecting with their value system. Connecting their value system with our value system, and connecting mission with who they are and what they value in the world. And it all gets back to, what do we know in the end? What do we know about them? So we can try to connect our values and our mission and our plans with what they're trying to do in life and what they value in life. That was a very long answer to a very simple question. I don't even know if I answered your question.
You did. No, it makes sense, because it's the act of getting that emotional connection to get them to do something. So that's a great way to put engagement. And then I'm really going to ask you a silly question or the weirdest follow-up, but like, we all know this, but why is this important? So why is it important to get people to engage? I mean, obviously there's a ranking aspects to it. If you look at like alumni engagement or whatnot, you help to increase rankings and things of that nature. But, why is it important for someone to have that connection from a feeling and the act of doing?
For our institutions, I would say, or for any mission-driven institution, a non-profit or not-for-profit institution, or charitable institution, it's as simple as this. We would not exist if we didn't have stakeholders who partnered with us as volunteers, as philanthropists or givers of any amount, and as people who support us, with good feeling, sort of the moral support. That just part of our business plan is based on having that support from, I'll call them community members, or those who we would want to invite into the wider community. I've worked at a couple of institutions that were, and still are, about 90 to 95% dependent on tuition to stay open, right? To make their operating budgets. And that is just completely unsustainable. So getting stakeholders to contribute to the annual fund or to make larger philanthropic gifts is just crucial to the bottom line. And I would just say our institutions would not exist without that partnership with those we're trying to bring in.
Yeah. And I think that the same is true. So if we're looking at it from maybe that advancement piece of it, but the same is true of that head and heart connection all the way to prospective students, right? So I think that that's probably a major role that you play as well, of bringing that knowledge from the advancement alumni side and using some of those learnings of, that persona of a prospective student, and how do you, get them to engage, which ultimately for them, it's not giving money necessarily, but it would be that act of applying or coming to the institution.
That's right. And, when I mentioned before this, how I found all of the work that I've done in so many different areas in communications and marketing and higher ed, connecting, one of the sort of the standards we have here is literally every piece that we put out, no matter what it is, it could be a tweet, it could be a case for support for a major campaign, that this should resonate with a 16-year-old student and their families. This should resonate with a particular donor or an audience of one that we're trying to reach. It should resonate with prospective faculty. Literally everything we put out should be expressing the values of the place, who we are, what we stand for, what we're doing in the world, and why that's meaningful. And so the idea that everything we do shows who we are and could be sending those same core messages, if you will, to literally any prospective audience that's out there. I think that's maybe a one test of how well we're doing our work here.
So I may throw you for a loop on this one, but I am going to be the voice of a listener right now. And they're like, David, that's great, but we don't know who we are. So how do we get a message that's going to resonate with a 16-year-old all the way up to a 70-year-old donor? So where could they start?
I've heard that before. It's either we don't know who we are or we are these 17 things, which sort of means the same thing. For me, it comes back to those conversations, those 40, if you will, or 20 conversations with the people of the institution. And oftentimes it will be a communications person who is able to kind of crack the code here, because it's, as journalists or former journalists, as many of us are, we're there to find stuff out. So if we come back with all of these conversations and print out the transcripts, it's pretty easy at that point to see themes shaping up. Mm-hmm. And the magic number is 3 when it comes down to messaging. And I've seen institutions, even the most complex institutions, where through this discovery process and through these conversations, you amass all of these words and phrases and themes, and you start to see, you start to put them in a hierarchy or chunk them out. These are this is a pretty higher sort of theme right here. This is sort of a how we do things kind of thing rather than who we are. I just start to go through all of those transcripts and put them into categories. this is how I've heard people talk about the values of the institution. Here's how we do things. Here's the challenges that we have. I sort of put them into those blocks. And then out of that, it's a process of taking the highest, I hope I'm explaining this well enough.
Yeah.
The highest principles and saying, this is who we are, A, B, and C. And then so many of what we've learned from those interviews or those conversations, all of that other content sort of feeds into one of those three columns as sort of reinforcing material. This is really standard sort of message platform kind of work. And for any colleague out there who's asking, we have not been able to figure this out. The first thing is to not try to figure it out, in your office. It's by going out or hiring a good firm. And there are some very good firms out there that do this, but you can do it in-house. Having all of those conversations and then sort of distilling from that, this is who we are. This is what we value. This is our sensibility, or this is the vibe of the place. And this is what we plan to accomplish in the world. I mean, those things rise to the surface, I think, pretty quickly.
Yes. And I think that is so true with, it's kind of the key findings is what I'm getting at or hearing is like, yeah, you have all of this information, and then what are the patterns and what are those key findings or the nuggets in it? And then to your point, it's like those things are going to start to jump out and you're going to see this picture almost painted and you're like, oh my gosh, that is us. That is true. And you didn't have to come up with it because it already existed in just the conversations that you're having. And I think to your point, you have a lot of resources on campus, but there are ways to get feedback also from prospective students. You've got campus tours that are happening. So whether they're virtually or on campus, you can ask parents or prospective students while they're in front of you of like, hey, while you're doing your search, what do you think of XYZ? And so you get that outsider's perspective too. It takes work. Maybe that's the point. It's like you have to plan these things out. And so on top of all the other things that y'all are tasked with on a daily basis, you're like, we have to have conversations too.
Right. And it's, I've hired a lot of magazine people when I put together communications offices, whether for campaigns or for whole institutions. And I think about magazine people in particular, and this comes out of my own magazine work. Magazine journalism, is based in, asking questions and going into stories where you follow leads, you chase follow-ups, and the story sort of reveals itself. And also in magazines, there is, as I said before, there's often so much room to be more expressive, to express, the soul of a place that might not come out, in a simple, let's say, news story. I don't mean to diminish the value of news stories, but in looking for magazine people over the years to bring into this marketing and communications division work, I found it's all about those first principles. Like you've never stopped being a journalist, and that's the core. And we just need to do the legwork, and because we wouldn't be able to be effective in anything that we do if we don't have that base.
So can I ask tell me a little bit more about the makeup of your in-house team. So a lot of our audiences or people that we're talking to, they may be a team of one, or there may be a team of two or three. So what does the makeup of your team look like?
So right now there are 28 of us.
Wow.
Which I know I'm talking to so many colleagues out there who are looking at the 1.5.
They're like throwing tomatoes at you right now.
So if I could soften this by saying I came from a staff of 6 in my last job. Okay. I've had staff of 40 before. So I've seen, and I'm so sensitive to the small staff. And so we have a large team. We also have, a couple thousand discrete projects a year from projects that will take us 10 minutes to projects that will take us 10 months. So I think a lot of this is just sort of commensurate with the scale or the scope of the work. But when I think about small teams, I think, and being on a small team at a really ambitious school in my last position, a lot of the work was around repurposing, and I think it still is. I think it still should be in any institution. But finding that core content and saying, how can we shape this into the admissions piece? How can we shape this into a case for support? How can we shape this into, you name it, a case for a foundation or corporation to invest in us? And it's just, I think, being attentive to what is the core content that we have, and then being able to repurpose. I've also been, for any of your listeners who want to reach me, I've got just a bag of tricks that I've learned over the years, including how to do a 88-page magazine 4 times a year on $300 in creative. And it's all about finding stuff that's out there already, and building, a magazine through that. For any colleagues thinking that's cheating, it works, and it's some of the most expressive magazine work, I think, and the most meaningful that I've done. So repurposing and is one thing to think about. And let me just reemphasize, I am so sensitive to the small teams, and some of it is expectation setting also for what you can physically accomplish.
Yeah, no, I don't think what you're doing is cheating at all. I think it's working smarter and not harder. And it's just like, how do you get the most bang for your buck? And so that's a great takeaway, especially if you are a team of one or you have limited resources. It's like, just look, everything that you have is probably already in front of you. And like, there's not really a need to reinvent the wheel. It's just, how do you do it with maybe some more pizzazz, if you will, and bringing it back to life. So I think that that's a great takeaway. And everyone should definitely reach out to you for some of those tidbits.
Happy to speak with him. I would, Allison, add one more thing there. It's so much of it is about establishing priorities, and nothing really focuses the mind in our work like having a very small staff and having 17 things in front of you to do. It really focuses the mind to work with the senior leadership to figure out what is most important here. What are the 6 things or the 9 things out of the 17 that we could actually work on? And then also, what are the shortcuts that we can do to produce the other pieces where our stakeholders or audiences wouldn't know that we were doing this on a shoestring? They would be getting really compelling stuff. But what are the decisions we're making internally that says, you know what, if we did this in this way, rather than writing 3,000 words, could we do this in a tweet storm and have just as much engagement? I think it's that kind of thinking also, after prioritizing, that could get us there.
Yeah. It's very clear that advancement and the alumni target audience is kind of at the core of everything that you do. So tell us a little bit more about that. Like what has really driven you towards the alumni engagement piece?
So I was, actually, here's a theme here. I was out of work.
Man, let's make sure that you're not out of work, David.
Thank you. But I've had sort of the best turns, I think, in my career when I've seen one job, not physically out of work, but one job really winding down. The writing was on the wall. This is not the right fit. And it was when I was at a magazine where things were not working out, and a position opened up to do work I'd never done before, which was to become a campaign communications director, for a major fundraising campaign. Mm-hmm. And, that just opened my eyes to the whole sort of alumni world and donor world in a way that alumni magazines didn't. I mean, alumni magazines were all about, in a very broad brush kind of way, engagement with the institution, through compelling words and images. In a campaign, I really learned the business of I wouldn't want to call it fundraising, but the business of philanthropy.
Yeah.
Important to an institution, and also the business model, the way that any institution needs to establish its advancement and development in alumni relations offices in order to engage in all of those different ways: principal giving, leadership giving, stewardship, annual fund, planned giving, events, all of that. And I really had an appreciation for the kind of targeted work in each one of those areas that needed to happen, and understood how different the approach, let's say, through those channels could be, even though we're trying to reach the same people that I was reaching in a single magazine.
Yeah. I mean, you are hitting different people at different times, right? Like if you're talking about a magazine versus an event, you're probably going to get different age groups, and you're getting different types of donors and capabilities in those. But you keep mentioning, the campaign communications from an advancement perspective and kind of that fundraising clause, if you're thinking about a campaign that way. But I want to kind of tie things together, like you mentioned at the beginning. And so I think a lot of times your campaign or your fundraising campaigns come out of the branding and the messaging of the institution itself, right? And so I think sometimes people can think of those as two completely separate acts when it's really not. There is a correlation. So how do you connect the dots between your brand and your institution and your messaging here, and how that comes to life in a fundraising campaign, for instance?
That's the first thing I learned when I got into this brand new world of campaign communications. And I sort of kicked myself. I should have known this a lot earlier, even as a magazine editor. But to understand that it all starts, that there's a through line, right? Mm-hmm. That it starts with the strategic plan or the strategic framework that usually a new president, it happens in a new presidency a couple years in. Who are we, where are we going, right? And a big community-wide process to be able to understand that everything starts there, the aspirations of the institution, and then to then move to a fundraising campaign, which is a little further down the line, mm-hmm. which is actually, I should make a quick step in there. It then moves to priority setting. What do we need here? Academically, out of classroom experience, or when it comes to access and student aid, what do we need in order to accomplish what's in that strategic plan? And then that usually often leads to an assessment of what's the capacity out in the donor world. Mm-hmm. Can we raise $10 million? Can we raise $10 billion? Right, depending on the institution. And then that leads to the campaign and the campaign plan, and that all of the messaging from the campaign is all of the content is tied, directly back to that strategic plan. And a lot of the words, a lot of the messaging it's often not verbatim, but it's often very close. It's steeped in that strategic planning process. And so for me to see that early on in a campaign, that the campaign wasn't, and campaign communications and marketing weren't adjacent to the institution's brand and where it was going, but actually developed out of that, was something that really connected a lot of dots for me. And I would say that if a strategic plan is about an institution asking, who are you and where are you going, mm-hmm. that a campaign and the marketing side of the campaign is all about who are you, where are you going, and why should I care? And it's that why should I care part, which is all about how do we motivate, how do we engage and motivate those we're trying to reach.
I love that piece. And it's funny, I'm going to tie this back to a side note for our listeners, that when I originally reached out to you, from an outsider's perspective looking in, you're like, oh, somebody in a role, it's all about increasing enrollment in the prospective student side of things. And we had a deeper conversation around that. And we're like, yeah, I do that, but I'm actually more focused on this other side of it. But I'm going to challenge you and our listeners who think that about themselves. It's that, no, actually, when you are engaging your alumni and you are maybe at this other end, and maybe you think your focus is on the communication of your donors and how the act of getting them to give or persuading them to help give, you are also increasing enrollment and you are focused on that. Because if I am a prospective student and you see the hubbub or you hear the hubbub and there's all this just noise or, excitement around a brand, that's going to make me more interested from a prospective student side. So it does all come full circle.
I think it does. And, one thing that campaigns do, obviously, is to raise philanthropic dollars, right? That need to survive and thrive. And the other things, as we all know, that campaigns do is they raise awareness. It's a time to sort of take stock of who you are as an institution. What are your values? What are your plans? Why should people care? And it's that part which usually becomes the real fine point of that a strategic plan doesn't really get to. The strategic plan is sort of it's not nebulous, but there's a lot of stuff in it. And once you get to the campaign where you actually have actual priorities, we want to raise and need to raise money for these things with these price tags in order to accomplish the following, then it really says who you are as an institution in a way exactly that reflects back on everything that we do for every population, whether it's incoming students or prospective students and families, prospective faculty, foundations, corporations, etc. Outside giving institutions also.
Yeah. No, this has been great. And I know that we are getting a little bit to time. So I just wanted to pass it over to you to see if there's anything, any insights that you wanted to leave for our audience.
Put me on the spot. Let me give me 2 seconds here. All right. So three very quick principles. The first one is I learned this from a really wise boss many years ago. And that is this phrase: communication is message received and not message sent. And that is just all about how do we position ourselves in the best way to be able to reach those we need to reach. And it goes back to where we started. It's all about understanding who they are, right? The second principle I would say is the 11th commandment: thou shalt not bore. We have an obligation to be interesting in everything that we do, whether it's a 7-word tweet or whether it's a 6,000-word magazine story. And finally, would love to leave our colleagues with this phrase: nothing neutral. Nothing neutral. The idea that everything we put out, literally everything, shows in some way, reflects in some way who we are as an institution, our values, our purpose, where we're going. And that doesn't mean we put in a 5-page paper in the midst of everything that describes that, but everything should sort of capture the soul of the place, no matter what it is we're putting out. So nothing neutral has been a guiding light for me also.
I love that. It's like, don't just ride the line for the sake of riding the line. It's like, be who you are. Like we mentioned, be authentic, be true to your voice. And again, your institution does have a voice. So I love it. Great point. Now I'm going to definitely put you on a personal hotspot. And I asked this of all of my guests, but if you could go back in time and give yourself one pro tip, what would it be?
Boy, that's a good question. One pro tip.
And it could be in life. It could be in your professional world. I would tell myself back then, knowing what I know now, try to understand, seek to understand before me assuming that what I was just in conversation with was somebody's motives, let's say, were questionable. I mean, I'm just thinking of those times when I haven't had, full-scale run-ins, but those tension points. Mm-hmm. And I wish I could tell my younger self, chill, everybody's got a story, try to figure out or ask them what's really at the core here.
so we wouldn't have those sort of tension points needlessly. And I think that's maybe just something that I would my older self would tell my younger self about anything in life.
Yes, I love it. I think it comes back to that listening point. And that came back for me, especially when you were like, let's just stop and listen to each other and talk at me. And I'm like, yeah, that would be my pro tip. Let's just listen more. But yeah, no, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been really great to talk to you. And I know that our audience has picked up a lot of really great insights.
And thank you so much, Allison. I really enjoyed it and happy to keep up the conversation anytime.
Awesome. All right, problem solvers, be sure to subscribe to our show in Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you don't mind, give us a little rating and review. That would be greatly appreciated. Also, be sure to visit us at theundeclaredpodcast.com. We would love for you to leave us your feedback, send us your questions, or just check in to see what we are all about. And I will also make sure that you have all of David's contact information because I know that he would be an amazing resource and he is more than willing for everyone to reach out to him. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Undeclared, the podcast that guides colleges and universities through their greatest challenges. Please leave us a rating and review and go to theundeclaredpodcast.com to tell us how we can help your college or university succeed. And remember, an educated planet is a better place for everyone.